Perhaps that's a perfect jumping off point for our next guest, Dr. Jodi Halpern. And that is, as we quote unquote move on from the pandemic, you could quite rightfully say to me, move on, move on. This thing's not over yet. But I see around me, look what's going on, for example, in Great Britain. Look what Boris Johnson's talking about. All mandates will be lifted. We see people moving on. Kids in schools, March 1st, there's a big day. Kids in schools had a big day too. Masks no longer mandatory. No more QR codes to get into restaurants. You're paying attention. You know what I'm getting at. So we're going to start talking about recovery in a way, and we'll have big high-level conversations about economic recovery, and we'll talk about social recovery. Can we mend these wounds? Can we heal? All the big high-level stuff. But what about on the personal level? What about on the self-care level? How do we understand the toll that a pandemic has taken on this, let alone people that have been ill, seriously ill with COVID-19, maybe people, the so-called long haulers living with long COVID symptoms? What about people that lost a loved one, that weren't able to properly say goodbye or properly mourn or properly celebrate that life? Dr. Jodi Halpern is a chancellor's professor in bioethics at UC Berkeley, researching how people who experience these serious health challenges in their prime of life and people who care for them can cope. Dr. Halpern, welcome to Real Talk, and thanks for making time for us.
Thank you, Ryan.
I guess I came into this a little bit supercharged, almost unintentionally, saying as we move on from the pandemic, and I realized even that could raise the ire of some folks. Where are you at with regards to processing where we're at as a society, and what do you gauge with regards to where people are at personally?
Well, I can bring my answer to you. In terms of the pandemic, I know as much as everybody else does about what's going to happen, obviously, in terms of variants, et cetera. But what I can share with you is what I've learned from 10 years of following people with life-changing losses and illnesses prior to the pandemic, and the stage that they're at about the 2-year mark, which turns out shockingly to be how long we've been in this pandemic. And at about the 2-year mark, where people are at is that they've been strenuously coping. They've been doing everything they can to use all their defense mechanisms to get through the pandemic or the phase of illness they're in, and they become burned out. And they're at a very critical inflection point or fork in the road in how they go on with their lives and how they psychologically can internalize what's happened with them and move on in a good way with their life.
When it comes to the toll that this takes on people, the pandemic, it's obviously, I think, probably a subjective conversation, right? For some folks, it will have impacted them in some way. For others, another way. Does the average person realize or recognize what they've been feeling, or the depth of what they've been feeling, or the significance in their own life?
Well, again, from 10 years of studying people with life-changing illnesses, cancer, heart disease, MS, my guess is that they don't yet recognize it, because people only start to recognize it after about 1.5 or 2 years. And what happens is people have been so busy coping and trying to deal and survive, take care of their families or function. And I can give you stories about that they really haven't been able to figure out, how does this really change the rest of my life? People use defense mechanisms, some of which are very healthy, like humor or altruism, helping neighbors, doing food shopping for neighbors. But they also use very unhealthy defense mechanisms like denial, blaming, avoiding, just to function. And after about 1.5 years or so, all the grief they've been pushing down and all the sense that they've lost a big chunk of their life and that their life may never be the same again can well up. And the question is, what helps people do the grieving they need to do in a way that can be really healthy for them? And we don't have a lot of clues about that in our cultures. But one of the things that matters enormously is if people can internalize empathy for themselves and other people. And I've been studying empathy for 30 years, and I can talk about 2 different parts of what I mean by internalizing empathy. And I can tell you some stories about that.
Yeah, I would love to hear it. I know our audience would too.
Okay, so the 2 parts of internalizing empathy that are so critical is they're the same thing that you get from a really good therapist. But what's amazing is my research shows that people can sort of do it for themselves and each other. And the 2 parts are creating a feeling of safety, even with very difficult emotions, and being safe is very, very important. And the other part is developing curiosity, empathic curiosity about your expectations for your life and yourself. Are you pushing yourself too hard? Why? And that curiosity can be therapeutic. So let me tell you two stories if we have time.
Yeah, we do. You bet. We got
Okay.
we got all the time in the world, Doc. It's your schedule.
I love the long form. I love your
Right?
show, and I love the long
Yeah,
form.
you bet.
It's so fantastic. But anyway, okay, two stories. The first story is about developing safety. First of all, where you get your safety may not be obvious. As I said, it can come from a therapist helping you grieve, but it can come in very different places. So this is the story of a woman named we'll call her Carly. So she had in her early child, at age 12, she was diagnosed with juvenile diabetes, and she had very distant, preoccupied parents. So she had to really cope with it on her own, learn how to use insulin and take care of herself. And she became a very independent woman. I met her in her 40s, and she had a successful life, and she had relationships and a very successful way of being with people, but she didn't really trust anyone very deeply to take care of her or be there for her because she had had so much adversity and independence from early in life. And in her mid-40s, her diabetes became much worse. So it was like a new illness. What happens to some people with juvenile diabetes is it becomes very brittle. So the way she relaxed in life was she would go biking or hiking on her own. But suddenly her blood sugar would drop so quickly that she could pass out and die if she were alone. And 1 in 20 people, her doctor told her, can die with brittle diabetes at that stage. So he said, someone has to be with you all the time. You can't just be on your own, which she couldn't tolerate the thought. But what she wound up doing is getting a support dog. There are support dogs for diabetes. The way I saw her at the gym, doing a spin class where this beautiful black lab came into the class with her, laid down in front of her bike. And when she started to really sweat, the dog sat up and stared at her until she got off the bike and took a protein bar. So this dog became her constant companion and made her life very safe. Then the dog developed cancer, and she had to get treatment for the dog. And the only way she could afford to do that was by asking for help. So she reached out to a veterinary surgery area that she knew, and the top veterinarian. She reached out, she went, they did free care for her dog. She went to stay near there, and people offered her housing. Someone else made meals for her. And she said this was transformative. She realized there was a social hold, that the world could be a safe place of people offering her help. And ever since then, and I've known her for years since, she and the dog volunteer at a cancer center where families meet, and she helps parents deal with their children with cancer and give the support she never received. So she's been psychologically transformed by the social hold that she found and the safety she found to deal with her illness.
Doctor, we'll recognize we're talking to you from the beautiful state of California, but let's take a look at some of the Canadian numbers here. I think that, just to provide some perspective, when we're talking about the number of people that'll be impacted to a certain degree, certainly by COVID. Look at this, 36,000 Canadians have died from COVID-19. Obviously, that number in the United States is much larger, but 36,000 loved ones lost from COVID-19. Almost 6 million, 5.89 million people worldwide have died from COVID-19. There have been more than 3.25 million cases of COVID-19 in Canada, and almost 500 million 425 million cases of COVID-19 worldwide. From almost any angle of approach, Doctor, this is an unprecedented challenge. Maybe aside from people walking planet Earth that would have memory of 1918 or, potentially, other obviously huge challenges. But this, for most people, is going to be, I think, a real challenge. And we're talking long-term challenge for a lot of people.
So let's talk about how are we going to create a social hold to deal with the grieving that we need to do. And even though everyone's COVID-19 was different, I see it as the whole world got awareness of mortality, whether you got it and lost a loved one or not. In one state, I talked to a group of women in Texas in a big corporation where 25% of them have lost a relative. So someone who's lost someone in the United States with 1 million deaths, close to 1 million deaths. And in Canada, that's still a big proportion of your 3.6 million people. So although you've done much better, frankly, but it's still, for each of those deaths, it doesn't matter who else has died, they've lost a loved one. How do you create a social hold? So let me say some of the things that we've been experimenting with that have been helpful. First of all, I started with the others, a task force at UC Berkeley. The School of Public Health here has 1,500 people in it, staff, faculty, students. And we had a group of 8 of us to reach out and really find out how 1,500 people were doing. And how do you do that? We wanted to have intimate conversations that really helped people. Well, early in COVID, a lot of people heard the scary figure that for each person with COVID, 3 other people get infected. So we decided if COVID can spread exponentially, social hold and empathy can spread exponentially also. So we asked each of the 8 of us to contact 3 people to have in-depth listening sessions. And then we would ask each of those 3 people to contact 3 people. We called it the power of 3. And we did it. And we reached all 1,500 people. But the question was, as we were training, what were we going to ask people? We didn't know each other. And it was the height of COVID deaths in the United States. So we were thinking, what do you say to someone when you call them and you don't know? Have they lost someone? Have they gotten sick? Are they home with school children trying to work and stressed out? What's going on in their life? Are they economically or the front line? Are they losing their job? Interestingly, we're a school of public health. The emphasis was so much on being positive that the younger folks in our group wanted to call people and say, how are you thriving? And they thought that would make people feel positive. But those of us that are older and have been in healthcare a long time, coach them. I've coached doctors and nurses for 30 years in how to have empathic curiosity. And I said, you absolutely have to start out just listening and saying to people, what's your COVID like? And just literally asking, because everyone's COVID is different. And nobody believed that would be therapeutic, but they tried it. We trained and they were open-minded. And it had an enormously therapeutic impact on our community. Mm-hmm. Just saying, what's your COVID been like? And just listening. It provides a hold and it helps people tell their story, often for the first time. And when people have to tell their story, they begin to grieve because they're with an empathic other. And sometimes it helps them even think about their story in a way that helps them see some new ways of helping themselves.
Dr. Jodi Halpern, our guest. I should mention your book. I mean, a really popular book, From Detached Concern to Empathy, Humanizing Medical Practice. It's been credited with catalyzing a wave of change in medical education. And of course, Doctor, you're working on a book right now, Remaking the Self in the Wake of Illness, presenting a model for post-traumatic growth. You talk about healthcare workers. This one stopped me in my tracks, this tweet just yesterday. It's a heartbreaker. From the account RN_crit care, like a critical care registered nurse, tweeted a coworker ended their life after our shift the other day, didn't go home and shower, didn't change out of scrubs. I don't know if it was planned or spontaneous, but I do know we got the last living moments, and I don't know how I feel about that. Our broken team is shattered, right? It's heavy, and that's just one story. And
I have to say, this is a big part of my life, is getting those calls, because I'm actually getting tears in my eyes because I've been working with doctors and nurses the whole crisis. We've been writing about this. First of all, I don't know if people realize, we've lost, not to suicide, we've lost many to suicide, but we've lost to COVID, at least 115,000 doctors and nurses worldwide directly to COVID. We have a 75% rate of major depression or generalized anxiety in doctors and nurses right now in the United States. We have a 15% rate of suicidal ideation, which is 1,000 times higher than the general population normally is. So we're losing people. We're seeing a lot of people leave the profession and burning out, and we're seeing more divorce, a lot more substance use, but we're seeing people kill themselves. I got a call a week and a half ago about a nurse killing herself. And she was someone who was volunteering around the country to help. I really do tear up during crises. So it's an unbelievable cost. I don't think we'll see people provide healthcare with the same levels of enthusiasm for a long time unless we do the work that I have studied that does help, which is to give an enormous amount of social hold and empathy and care. I mean, people want to give it to healthcare workers. One thing that's helped the general population during COVID, I think you have that in Canada as well, is people go out on the street at 8 o'clock at night and in their neighborhoods. In the US, they've been doing that and clapping and thanking healthcare workers. I think it's helped people be with their own neighbors, do something with their neighbors and feel in it together. But we have to do a lot more financially, socially, give people real respite. People need respite.
Yeah. Jodi, it's like, you say that at the banging the pots and the pans, and that feels like 2 years ago. It kind of was 2 years ago. And then we've had the pendulum swing the entire other direction. Several months ago, we had a bunch of Maroons blockading and protesting at hospitals and harassing healthcare workers. I mean, we've seen it go both ways. I've got a personal friend, obviously won't identify her, but she's an ICU nurse. She told me a while ago, she said, she didn't tell her friends, she didn't tell any of us, none of us knew it, but she says, I actually requested a transfer out of ICU. She said, I was just looking for a different career opportunity. This was pre-pandemic. It was like right around the time, like February of 2020. She had requested a transfer out of the ICU, just wanted a change of pace. Of course, they denied the transfer because they've needed ICU personnel more than ever before. And for the last 2 years, she's been there, committed to it, and committed to her calling as an ICU nurse. But she said when this thing's done, like when we're out on the other side of this, she's considering leaving the profession entirely. And I know that there are a ton of people that feel that way right now. It's a problem.
I think that we've long not, especially nurses, but doctors too, we've long underestimated how much internalizing. We want doctors and nurses not to just stop being doctors and nurses at the end of the day. We want them to have a deep identification with their caring role. But we haven't trained them in the most important skill. Well, first of all, during COVID, we have overworked them, and I think that's crucial. And then they haven't had the time to mourn the deaths that they're involved in, and they haven't felt, and we didn't even protect them with enough safety equipment to protect their own lives and their families early on. So those are the big sins of COVID by our governments, at least in the US. I don't know if Canada was better with PPE, giving protective equipment early on. I mean, that was insane to ask people to risk their lives and their families' lives and not even give them the adequate equipment to protect themselves. But a longstanding issue that does help, not against tragedies like not equipping people, but one thing that does help is to recognize the difference in healthcare providers. This is what I've been doing for decades, between sympathy and empathic curiosity, and help them learn to be really interested in their patients, but to be able to have processes of using what they learn in a way that doesn't burn them out. And that's why, and we all need that now. We all need that. We need constructive projects we can do together. The city of LA has asked us to be involved in a citywide memorial for COVID that would be a dynamic memorial. It could be an experiential museum. But what we're doing to make it a really therapeutic process is we're proposing having focus groups throughout the whole city. We'll have them for nurses and doctors. We'll have them for some of the Black and brown communities in LA that have been hit a lot harder. Mm-hmm. We'll have them for elders that have been isolated in assisted living. We'll have them for frontline workers. But then we'll also think, what do people specific, and we'll do, it's empathic listening that we do in those groups. And then what can we do to help the whole city put its arms around each other and create what my current book, Remaking the Self in the Wake of Illness, is about, which is creating a safe social hold. What can we do to create a safe social hold so everyone feels safe, so that grieving can be therapeutic?
Can I ask you a personal question to wrap here, Doc? What do you do for your own self-care? Like you're getting calls when people are lost to suicide, you're facilitating these groups, you're shouldering an immense amount of weight on behalf of other people. You're doing a lot of heavy lifting. What do you do to look after yourself?
Well, honestly, I'm lucky to have wonderful family and friends, although they have, my elder mother has been very ill during COVID. So it's wonderful, but involves additional caregiving. But I think that honestly, the thing that's, I think it's interesting. I picked to tell you the story about a woman with her dog, because I have the world's most, I have a therapeutic, I mean, she's not technically a therapeutic dog, but I have a dog that every member of my family finds we get so much love from, and we love to go out and take walks with her. So nature can be a mother, a dog can be a mother. I mean, a mother in the sense of Mother Earth or a maternal holding environment. So I think being with my dog, and I think being in beautiful settings with my dog, in addition to friends, has made a huge difference.
I appreciate you taking the question. A lot of beautiful settings around University of California, Berkeley, I've heard. Congratulations on the upcoming book. People that want to learn more can go directly to your website. It's jodihalpern.com. You can learn more about her speaking opportunities, her research, her publications, the consulting that Dr. Halpern does. And of course, if you liked what you heard here on the show, make sure you share this link with people you know that might benefit from these wise words. Dr. Halpern, thanks for your time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Ryan.
You bet. What a good conversation from the author of From Detached Concern to Empathy, Humanizing Medical Practice, Jodi's upcoming book, Remaking the Self in the Wake of Illness. Sarah Hoyles is keeping an eye. In just a second, we'll